Hello and welcome back, my partners in crime. Welcome to Murder Analysed for another true crime. Listen, this crime is gruesome. It's terrible, really. It's got twists and turns in it. There's lots going on in this case. It's a very interesting case, but it is a very gruesome case. And therefore, as I always say, this is for mature audiences only. Now, today's case is the case of the Jigsaw Killer or Jigsaw Murder. However you'd like to know, or to say what it's about. It's sort of highlighted along the place depending on who you're talking about. When we look at this murder and why it's called the Jigsaw Murder, it's because the way that Jeffrey Howe's body was dismembered and left, I think, in Hertfordshire and Leicestershire counties in the UK. Now, the reason it's called the Jigsaw is because where they'd left these different body parts around, people started finding, didn't they, then these body parts in different places. So now the police are aware now that someone has been murdered in such a heinous way. And it's took a few days for all of these body parts really to be found, several days really. But also you have now different constabularies of police now finding, we have Hertfordshire and then we have Leicestershire police and stuff like this, finding body parts in their jurisdiction. What they want to know is, really, when they come together, is all these body parts, one from the same person, because there could have been multiple for all they knew. Two, who is the person? So they've had to collect all this body parts, severed body parts of Jeffrey Howe, not knowing who he was at the time. So this is why it's called the Jigsaw Murders, because they all had to fit together to give some clear knowledge of really what happened here. First thing they had to find out in this case was who was the victim, and it turned out it was Jeffrey Howe, this 42-year-old kitchen salesman and ex-chef. I think he worked in Italy as a chef and stuff, so he's a very nice man, very well liked man, wasn't into anything at all. When you now find out that someone like Jeffrey Howe has been murdered in this sort of a way, the questions are why, how and who. That's what the police were looking at. Really, it was like looking at a needle in a haystack. So all this police now had to do was work out between them all these forces of the best plan of attack to catch a killer like this. And the first thing they did was join up and make a plan. And really, they needed to make this plan, because as we go through this case, you're going to see just how terrible these people were. Now, the defendant in this case was a person called Stephen Marshall. Now, he was about 42, I think, at the time these crimes took place. Now, his girlfriend was Sarah Bush. Now, she was 21 at the time of these murders. 21. So as we go through this case, it opens up. I'm going to be quite honest with you. The murder of Jeffrey Howe, the dismemberment of Jeffrey Howe, and the placement of the bodies is probably the simplest bit of this case. It's then what happens in court. It's what they say and do as their defences, as their, and the things that come out in court that make this case such a fascinating case. So, let's do it. So let's start with Jeffrey Howe. Let's start with the victim here in this case. This 40, I think it was 49 actually, Jeffrey. He's 49-year-old, this kitchen salesman, I've said before. He was a chef, so I don't think it was your basic kitchens he was selling. I think it was more your industrial type kitchens, for chefs in hotels and different things like that. But whatever kitchens he was selling, he was very good, and he made, a living. And what everyone knew him said that he was jovial, he was happy, very, very nice man, and would give you anything. Some of the neighbours have said, at 49 you move into these, apartments in, you know, Southgate, and you think, okay, I'm going to sort of retire and just do little bits. So he did have arguments and stuff about the kids playing and everything else. Just general stuff though. He had 2 Jaguar cars that they said that the neighbours had reported, but actually for about 6 months they hadn't seen Jeffrey driving around or using these cars or arguing with him over these children. So it was unusual. It was unusual that no one had seen Jeffrey in this time. Jeffrey had been married twice before, I think, and but you're really an ordinary man, you know, living an ordinary life, his life, not harming anyone really, just actually quite a friendly and giving person. And you can see by his character how he then becomes connected to someone like Stephen Marshall. So Stephen Marshall, at the time actually of this measure, he's 38. He was 38 years old. He was, I think, an ex-bodybuilder, an ex-bouncer. I think he owned a gym. He was from Borehamwood in Hertfordshire. He was actually meant to be quite a violent man, to tell the truth. And when you look at Jeffrey Howe and him, you know, they don't fit, right? Marshall's lifestyle to Jeffrey Howe's lifestyle was miles apart. They should never have met. But I think with Marshall, when you, I don't think anyone, not one person that they spoke to about Marshall had really a good word for him. He was very aggressive, he was very violent, he would attack you in seconds anyway. But, you know, quite up himself really, thought he was something. Quite a big man. He was a bouncer. He'd been a bouncer in the 90s, and that's relevant, and that's going to be relevant as we come through this case. And you know, I think he did once own a gym. I don't think he still did. Now, how Stephen Marshall and Jeffrey Howe met. Stephen was a work associate of his in some form. Don't know in what way, but he was. And also, that's why Jeffrey Howe rented a room in his 2-bedroom apartment in London, Southgate, to Stephen Marshall. So he'd rented him a room. Now you brought this man, not only as a work associate where you say hi and he's probably lovely at work, his personality is normal, you know, he's getting on with everyone. You've now brought this man into your home. And that was the biggest mistake, wasn't it, really, for Jeffrey? That really was. So, as I've said to you before about Jeffrey Howe's personality, so he had met, and I think this explains it actually, probably better. He'd met Stephen as an associate through work. He'd used to go out for drinks after work, like most people do when you work in different environments. You go out and you have drinks. And Jeffrey Howe felt quite sorry for Stephen Marshall. He needed somewhere to live. So in 2008, Jeffrey Howe offered Stephen Marshall and his girlfriend at the time, Sarah Bush, his 21-year-old, a room without paying any rent for this room. He offered him it because he wanted to help him out. He wanted to help this man out. And so he let them move into his property with him because he didn't need both rooms. He didn't. He thought he wasn't making any money out of it either. He let them use it for free. Just give him the room because he was a friend and a work associate. He had little drinks with him after work. They built a little relationship. Have the room, mate. You know, don't worry. You haven't got to pay me any rent. That was in 2008. Jeffrey Howe was dead by 2009. Now look, this Sarah Bush, it's stated, and it has been stated a few times in a few different things that we put up, that she was a sex worker. Now she was 21-year-old. Stephen Marshall was 38-year-old man, ex-bouncer, quite violent, well known to be quite violent man. Didn't have much, did he, really? You know, he had nothing. He was working, he couldn't even afford rent. Listen, and rent in London's, you know, expensive if you want your own place, but he was moved out of Borehamwood for a reason. He was actually brought up in St Albans in Hertfordshire. Then he'd got a job, moved, and I think she was from Southgate. Sarah Bush, this 21-year-old, she was, the sex worker. She was from Southgate, and she met him. They joined up, and then Jeffrey Howe came into it by giving him the room. This is how this whole thing really started here. This is what really ended Jeffrey Howe's life. The kindness ended his life. There's some other little bits about Sarah, and I'm trying to, with Sarah Bush, we have to look at this as from Stephen's point of view. He had met her when she was a prostitute. That's when he met her. He had hired her as a prostitute. He then sort of took control over her, and he changed her name to Sarah. Right? She already had a child. She'd been brought up in care. She had a child at 15. I think the child died at 10 days old. Listen, this girl didn't have a good start in life. She didn't at all. People in care don't have the best of times. They don't. They really don't. Even if you have the best foster parents going, you still have issues from being put into care, because most children, when they're put into care, believe it's their fault, don't they? What have I done wrong for someone to take me away from my parents? Because as children, they don't relate that parent to being bad, even if they're being beaten or anything else. That's all they usually know. So Sarah's background really means something here. It really should mean how controlling Stephen Marshall was over her. When we talk about coercive control, this is it. You have someone of 21-year-old now being brought in to someone like Stephen Marshall's life, this violent, aggressive man, controlling man. Now he's changing your name. Now you're with him. You're no longer doing your job anymore. I'm going to look after you. Then he brings her into, the worst thing he could do was bring her into the murder of Jeffrey Howe. Horrific murder. And this girl was there. She was there. So I think her background is really important here when we look at, really, was she capable of doing this crime? Anyone's capable, but did she do it? And as we come down into the trial, actually before the trial, as we come down into when they're arrested, you can see the behaviour of both now changing. But her background is just as important as Stephen Marshall's background. Can't find too much out about him, really, but all we need to know about Stephen Marshall is there was not one person that you could speak to about Stephen Marshall that would tell you a good thing about him. Absolutely not. So it's believed, and it's theories, I think, to tell you the truth, but it is believed that on the 8th or 9th of March 2009, Stephen Marshall entered Jeffrey's bedroom, probably when Jeffrey was asleep, and stabbed him to death. And Sarah Bush would have been present at that time of that murder, without a doubt. She was there. After the murder, Stephen Marshall then takes Jeffrey Howe's body to the bathroom and starts to dismember it. He's cut off his head, his arms, his legs, and then has a plan of what he's going to do with these body parts. Now, cutting up a body is not easy. It's really not. There's an art to it. But you can learn how to do it, and you see, there's no rush here. Stephen Marshall and Miss Bush wasn't in any rush, was they? They wasn't. They could have took their time in this bathroom to dismember this body. They probably did. It's not easy. Jeffrey Howe wasn't a small man. He wasn't. If they'd had any sense, you know, did they leave him to decay a little bit to make it easier? Don't know. Or did they want to get rid of this body as quick as possible? But what they did then was start then to dissect parts of his body, put them in like hold-all bags and stuff, because we don't really know what's going on, do we, in Stephen Marshall's mind at this point, or actually in Sarah Bush's mind, if she is witnessing this. Or actually may not have done the murder, but you're witnessing this. You've witnessed a man being stabbed to death, took to a bathroom and dismembered. Bloody shocking, really. Now, on the 22nd of March, we had the first body part found. Now, I think it's Cottered in Hertfordshire. I'll put the map up, you can see it, of where these were found. But that was the first body part found. So that was a leg, I think it was. Yeah, it was a leg, and the foot was still attached. That was the first body part found on the 22nd. So they believe that Jeffrey Howe was murdered between the 8th and 9th. This gives quite a long time for them to dismember a body and then start to dump the body parts. People don't know, again, all theories, if they dumped all the body parts in one day or they've done it staggering over time. We don't really know. It's all theories. So on the 29th now of March, your second body part was found. I think it was the left forearm, and I think it was dismembered from the elbow down to the wrist. Now that was found on a grass verge in Drovers Lane in Wheat Hampstead in Hertfordshire. So they're driving around, they're chucking these body parts out. Again, one was found in the green holdall, this one was found in another bag. Then on the 31st of March, now we have the head. Right, the head was unearthed by a farmer but in a cattle pen, and that was in Leicestershire. So they took the head further away, right, further away. The flesh had been removed, the eyes and ears, and the neck had been cut off. Cut off at the neck, so they removed the ears, they removed the eyes. I mean, you don't just dismember the body. They've removed body parts as well. That's what these people have done. Whether she was a part of that, but she was there. She was in the car dropping off these body parts of this poor man, Jeffrey Howe. This is what she done. And when you find out the reason why they've done it, shocking, really. Anyway, 7th of April, the right leg was found in a holdall near I think Puckeridge in Hertfordshire. 11th of April, then the torso, the right arm and upper left arm were discovered in a ditch by a walker near Standon in Hertfordshire, inside a green suitcase. So he tried to put it all in there, and it was the same brand as the holdall that was used within the first one. And that's sort of the parts then. So this is what I'm saying, from the 22nd of March to the 11th of April now, we have body parts being found in all different areas. A lot in Hertfordshire, but also other areas. So now we have a police force now coming together, because listen, when that first body part was found, there's a murder investigation going. Because you know now there's other body parts coming. They knew it, the police. But I think they were baffled at first, thinking, who would just do one, one body part? This is where this jigsaw murder now starts to take on, this investigation. This police really had their work cut out in this one. Absolutely. There was no going back now. They had to actually find out first who was the victim. Who was the victim? How he died, where he died, and why. Right, so this investigation started now. Now, at first it started with Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire Police, and I think it was Superintendent Michael Hallen from Bedfordshire Police, and then the Major Crimes Unit then led this investigation, really, because it was really now important, you know, because they didn't know if they had a serial killer on their hands. When you have a murderer like this that can, you know, we know this person's been killed, we know this person's been dismembered. Who else? Who's next? That's really what was important to the police, to really put this, you know, puzzle together, this jigsaw puzzle together. And that is first finding out who is the victim. Once they found out who Jeffrey Howe was, then they could work back from that. Now, it was interesting in this case when you think about this pair of killers, really, that Jeffrey Howe had a flat in Westgate, London. He was living there, he had money in the bank, he had been working. Not many people had seen him for around 6 months, really. So they knew something. So the police, the first thing, once they've identified it is Jeffrey Howe, whose body parts there, they've then gone to the flat, because he owns it, the flat. And who answers the door but Stephen Marshall? And who is there with Stephen Marshall is Sarah Bush in this flat, which is spotlessly clean. Spotlessly clean. But they are asked, where is Jeffrey? They couldn't really give him an answer. They just said he was away. They were saying different sort of things like this. But they were suspicious. The police were suspicious of them. Actually, so suspicious, the constable that came out of the house actually rang the detective and said, you know, what do you want us to do? Because we think there's something wrong here. And they was told then to come back, and then the task force itself was then set up to find out, really. But I think they knew straight away, really, that Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush had something to do with this murder. I think it was quite clear, quite obvious, right from the beginning. Again, that comes paramount later on when we go into court and we hear about what Stephen's sort of said, to how clever you think he is. So in the meantime, of course, the police now are still trying to find anything to do with Jeffrey Howe. So of course all his bank records are checked, aren't they? The phone, the CCTV, everything's checked. And it turns out what this pair had done to Jeffrey's bank accounts is that they've, probably about the day after they'd murdered him, they was online, doing online shopping using his cards. They'd done that for a few days, different things, all different supermarkets and different shops like Little Woods and all this stuff. I think they use there's quite a lot of expenditure coming out of his bank. And then what they did, they started writing cheques. You see, I think one of the cheques was £850, wrote to Stephen Marshall from Jeffrey Howe's account. A cheque. He went into the bank, put the cheque in the account, in the bank for £850. That wasn't all they did though, because now we have, you know, you thinking if Jeffrey Howe's gone away, where's his cars? Because he had 2 Jags. What they had done, these, you know, really intelligent killers, they had sold one of the cars on eBay. You know, and their fingerprints were on the receipt. They'd sold his car. Now, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't use his bank account. You wouldn't do all that. Sell his cars and actually keep his number plate, which was a personalised number plate. Swap number plates. And then I think Stephen Marshall even had the cheek to go into a petrol station and he'd put them number plates of Jeffrey Howe's number plates on his own vehicle, filled his car up with petrol and didn't pay for it and drove off. So these are all then hitting flags, because when you drive into a petrol station you have, of course, number plate recognition, because if you do that and you drive away, that's going to flag up. The police are going to be looking for you. So now Jeffrey Howe's car has come up in taking petrol from a petrol station. But you see, petrol stations have got CCTV, So on the CCTV, it's not Jeffrey Howe's car, it's Stephen Marshall's car with Jeffrey Howe's number plates on it, and Stephen Marshall filling the car up with petrol. This is how stupid this man is, which again is relevant as we go through now into where these pair have been arrested. Now the fun really starts, doesn't it? So okay, this investigation is going on. The police believe they now know from the evidence that they had gained, what we just talked about, the CCTV evidence, the selling of the cars, the using of the finances. I think they used about £5,500 or £5,800 of Jeffrey Howe's money after he had died. So really, that's what it come about. They lived in his flat. They were living in this flat rent-free anyway before they even killed him. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough, was it, for Stephen Marshall? He wanted Jeffrey Howe's life, really. He wanted it. He took it. He killed that man in his sleep, and the police knew that. He knew. They knew that they had done it. They just couldn't find where. They knew now. They now knew why, because of the money and the car. It was greed. It was financial gain, really, why they killed Jeffrey Howe. Really, for £5,000 and to set, you know, it's just shocking, isn't it, really? But see, now the police are on him. So they've now gone with a warrant now to search, of course, Jeffrey's home, because they need to find out whether this was the crime scene. Because remember, on the face of it, the flat was in perfect condition, perfectly clean. Oh, it has had a really good clean up. But you see, the police are very thorough when they're looking for a crime scene. That they know, you know, you've chopped up a body in this place. There is going to be blood, no matter how much you try and get rid of it. So they lift the carpets. Now, they found multiple blood splatter, multiple blood pools of blood, both in the bedroom and in the bathroom. So they knew, now that's how they now knew that Jeffrey Howe was stabbed to death in his bed, probably asleep, didn't know what was coming. Hopefully it was quick for Jeffrey. Then after that, they took his body to the bathroom and dismembered it in there. When you are dismembering a body in a bathroom, in a standard everyday bathroom, there is always going to be blood evidence left. Of course there is. No matter how much you think you can clean it up, you can't, because it's going to go under the tiles. It's going to go, blood will go anywhere. DNA and blood will go anywhere. They couldn't get rid of it, and that's how they were caught. But of course, you know, you've got Stephen Marshall now arrested. You've got Sarah Bush arrested. You know, this, you know, one's 38, one's 21. Told you about the background of Sarah. But then you see, as they're being interviewed, all he's saying is no comment, no comment, no comment, which is his legal right to do. You know, you don't have to say anything until, you know, all this sort of stuff. He can say that. He doesn't have to say a word. But if he is your friend, someone that puts you up, someone that's given you free accommodation, you and your girlfriend, for a year, wouldn't you want to know what's happened to Jeffrey Howe if you had nothing to do with it? So the police's suspicion was heightened anyway then, because you have a man now and a girl that really are not having none of it. There's just no comment, no comment, no comment. That was it for every question. Every question. Then all of a sudden, something changes when the evidence starts coming in. So then it's right. So we have to think, overwhelming evidence on this pair. Overwhelming. From DNA, CCTV, they've used, you know, fingerprint analysis was done on the receipts. They've sold his goods. They've done everything they can do to really make themselves look as guilty as possible, and without doubt it was overwhelming, this evidence. But then we have to talk about now when they started to realise, hang on a minute, okay, I think they've got us here. they go to this cutthroat defence, right? Now, a cutthroat defence is where either party, because you have two people here that were both charged with murder, right? Both charged with murder. So one's now saying the other one did it, and they're saying they did it. A cutthroat defence. Who did it? Who did it? Did they both? It's hard to prove, isn't it? Really. And we spoke before about, you know, the weight of evidence that you have to prove it. And when you have two now defendants saying, oh, it wasn't me, it was her, or it wasn't me, it was him. That's how it went on for ages. Anyway, they both went into court, both charged with murder of poor Jeffrey. The trial started, and I think the trial was, first of all, it went to, well, actually, all this questioning, I know a lot of people in Hertfordshire like to know sort of where they was questioned. They was questioned in Hatfield Police Station, actually, by the Serious Crime Unit and the task force there. Then they went to Stevenage Magistrate Court, where then it was caught up because, you know, the crime was so severe. It's then upped, and then the trial was actually held in St Albans Crown Court. And that began, I think, on the 12th of January 2010 is when this trial began. Now, don't forget, Stephen Marshall has said all this way through, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. That was his plea. And her, not guilty. She never said she was guilty of anything. All the way through, we're getting through, about 3 weeks into this trial, all this overwhelming evidence is coming in. All of a sudden, Stephen Marshall changes his plea. After all that, after all them interviews in Hatfield Police Station, no comment, no comment, no comment. For someone, a man that was meant to look after you, help you out, me and mate, you couldn't even make a comment about it. It just was terrible. And that went for her as well. No comment. They get into the court, the first court, at Stevenage Magistrates Court. Then there's, you know, what's your plea? Not guilty. Both of them. Alright, up to Crown then for trial. They go into there, they plead not guilty. 3 weeks into this case, which is now costing thousands, this man then changes his plea to guilty. He says he's guilty. Now what that does then for Sarah Bush, because she's continually said she's not guilty, and we'll get rid of Sarah Bush now because really that we're done with her. I've explained to you really about her background, and she was probably under some control, but even so, really, to see someone be murdered like that, dismembered, and you've helped them, you know, to get rid of the body parts, is a disgrace. You know, there is no excuse at 21 to know what you're doing was wrong. Really, there isn't. But because she didn't plead guilty to anything, she'd already pleaded not guilty continuously through it, he then pleads guilty. Sarah Bush is then, I think, she was done for perverting the course of justice and disposing of the body parts. She received 3 years and 9 months. 3 years and 9 months. That's her done. Now let's move on to Stephen Marshall. So, as I've said, he's now in court. I bet they couldn't believe it in this court. I've never heard of it. I don't even think this police or the prosecution must have thought, well, what's going on? Midway through a trial, you plead guilty to the murder. Listen, the evidence was so overwhelming for this. But you see, he didn't stop there. Marshall, he didn't stop at that. Just pleading guilty to that one. He then says, I've done 4 more. 4 more, he says he's done. Out of the blue. Just wants to say it. Not only have I killed 4 more people, I've chopped them up and disposed of their bodies. Okay, I bet you know, I would have loved to have been in this courtroom because I've never heard of anything like it. I don't think you'll ever hear anything like it again. But then it sort of gets worse then, because he said, well, I was a member in the 90s. I was a bouncer, and I was a member of the criminal underworld, and I was the hitman for them, and I dismembered at least 4 bodies, disposed of that in that way for them. What do you think to that then? I mean, you're going to have your opinion and I've got mine, so I'd like to hear your opinion. But here's mine on Stephen Marshall's confession while under trial for 1 murder and admits to 4. This Stephen Marshall, yes, he's violent. Yes, he's cut up a body and he's done quite a good job of it by all accounts. But he had time, you see, to do that and learn that. So do I believe Stephen Marshall's account of his life in the 90s and what he done? No. I think he's a fantasist. I think he's watched too much TV. I think he thought, I'm going to go to prison here, because the evidence was so overwhelming, for a very long time. And I've spoke before what prisons are like for people like him, because this man's quite a weak man, right? He's a big man, he's quite a bit violent, but he killed Jeffrey Howe in his sleep. In his sleep. A 49-year-old man that could not fight back at all. That doesn't make this man someone that's going to make himself in prison. But you know what will make it easier for him in prison? If they think he's connected to some organised crime firm. And he is the person that they have relied on to get rid of and cut up bodies for them. Listen, organised crime are a lot of things, right? There are a lot of things. We could call them a lot of things. But stupid is not one of them. This Stephen Marshall is absolutely so bad at his job, if you want to call it a job, because don't get me wrong, right? Don't get me wrong. Organised crime do have people, and we've said it before on the members bit behind it, we just done a case on organised crime. They do have people like this. Of course they do, right? But would they choose someone like Stephen Marshall to do their dirty work? Now, the dirty work in this case would be to, whether you've killed that person or you just need to dismember that person, depending on what your job is. The reliance on this man to not get caught, right? Get rid of them body parts in such a way you are not getting caught. No, I don't think they would have that reliance in him. I don't. Plus, you're paid quite a lot of money, you know, to be some assassin, you know, for these people. And again, we've talked about this before. So do I believe that Stephen Marshall worked for organised crime in the 90s? He may have worked for organised crime in the 90s as a bouncer in the clubs, running the drugs or the raves. Probably. That's what many of them did. But do I believe that they've then hired Stephen Marshall to become like the Iceman? You know, in America, and I think this is probably what he's watched, who was deadly. He worked for the mob. He was the hitman for the mob. And if they put a hit out on you, mate, your body was never going to be found. I think Stephen Marshall, this person that says that he has admitted in court not only to that 1 murder but to 4 others and dismembering bodies for organised crime, is a load of bullshit. Absolutely. It's a man that's trying to save himself when he's going to prison, to go in there as a protected man, right? That's what he's trying to do. When you look at Stephen Marshall's character, that's what he's trying to do. If I go into a mainstream prison, because I'm going to get a lifetime of it in there, I have to go in with them fearing me or respecting me, because that's what he wanted. Respect. Not from the people in the courtroom, not from the general public, from the inmates. This is what it's all about. The inmates. how are they going to react to me now? Really, that's what it's about. It's a fantasist. Absolutely, he is. No way on this earth someone as thick as this, who would do this sort of crime, leave body parts, leave evidence to where you're going to get caught, would work for any organised crime people in that sort of position, really. And he had no money. He couldn't afford rent. He couldn't afford rent. If you've always got rid of bodies for organised crime, you've done 4 of them, they would hire you to do more, wouldn't they? You'd be able to pay your rent. You'd probably be able to buy the bloody house in Southgate. Absolute liar. The man's a liar. And I believe so is she. But that's my opinion. I'd like to hear yours. Now we have to talk about this crime family that he says he worked for, right? He said between 1995 and 1998 he did work for this Adams crime family as a doorman. He was a doorman in this London nightclub. Now listen, as I said, you know, I've said it. I know many bouncers that, you know, that are or were at that time into organised crime and probably still are and have worked their way up, but not to this level. He says that he dismembered bodies between for these people between 1995 and 1998. So why didn't they keep him on? So, and he says this Adams crime family, right, who he worked for in this nightclub, and his admissions were a surprise to the police because the police checked it out and they couldn't find anyone missing or you know not found which was related to this crime people. Also, he then refused to give any further details about that. Listen, if you'd been a hitman for any crime family, you wouldn't be telling any of it. Not any of it. I think it's only right that we have to now investigate really and look into these so-called, well not so-called, to tell you the truth, we're going to talk about the Adams family's criminal background, right? So I think we can't leave it, because the minute Stephen Marshall said that he was, well, one is alleged that he was actually the nephew of Terry Adams, which is the boss of this syndicate, and it's the Clerkenwell criminal syndicate coming out of London, Islington, London. He's actually said, and it's been alleged, that he says he's the nephew of Terry Adams, right, this boss. And, you know, I think as we've gone through this case and we've sort of highlighted about the murder, what you can do about the murder, and where he's gone to court, he's denied, gone into court, and then in court, for no reason at all, absolutely no reason at all, he's then come out and said that he was a hitman, I suppose, or, you know, dismembered bodies for this syndicate. Now, I still don't believe him, but I think it's best that we look into this syndicate, because most of you would not have heard, if you're not from, you know, the UK, about this family. Now listen, everything I'm going to say about the Adams family is alleged, apart from some money laundering stuff, this, that and the other, right? It's alleged. So it's alleged that they are probably one of the most dangerous, feared crime gangs in, you know, this country, really. They've got links to other drug cartels and stuff in the US and other places like that, as many of these syndicates would have, right, these criminal syndicates, they would have now probably in Europe and everywhere else. I think they're they started, you know, 80s and 90s really. You had this Terry Adams that and his brothers, and I'll name the brothers in a minute. He was the leader, and he really, I think there's 11 brothers and sisters. They're not all related in any way to this or any other crimes, right? It's only alleged really about 3 or 4 of these brothers that are to do with the criminal underworld. Now, the reason I keep saying alleged, because they haven't gone to prison for it. They've gone to prison for money laundering and this, that and the other. But they're linked to about 25 gangland murders. The gold heists and all this sort of stuff they're linked to. You know, their worth, estimated worth of this criminal gang, this Adams family or the A-team or the Clerkenwell crime syndicate, is worth over £200 million. That's their estimated worth. Really, it's a lot of money. So my issue is with someone like Stephen Marshall saying that he was linked in any way to these gangs, and as I've said, it was probably right that he was working for them as a doorman on the nightclubs in the 90s, because as I've said, in the 90s, with all the raves and everything, the doormen, the criminal gangs run the clubs. That's why now nightclubs have got so many restrictions on them, you know, the regulations and stuff, and it's not viable anymore for criminal gangs really to run these clubs. It's not money making anymore. There's plenty of other ways of making money where you haven't got to go through all these regulations and stuff like that. And I think, yes, I believe he was a bouncer on the door in one of these clubs, probably run either by this criminal gang or others in that area, and he must have seen a lot of things then. And I'm not saying that any criminal family like these or any other criminal syndicates or whatever like that do not chop up bodies. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they don't usually chop up bodies of someone like Jeffrey Howe, who has got nothing to do with any criminal underworld at all. At all. There was no reason for the dismemberment of that body other than I think Stephen Marshall was playing some sort of a game, right? He actually thought he could get away with murdering Jeffrey Howe and dumping that body like that. It's like he's playing a game with the police. So my only question here was when you have a syndicate like this, powerful people that started to decline about 2010 anyway in their power, a lot of these members were killed in prison because of the gang rivalry. You know, if you have now a family syndicate that is worth 200 million, someone is always going to want to take control of that, aren't they? They really are. And so this is my issue with Stephen Marshall. He doesn't fit the profile of someone that would be hired by these people, especially someone like Terry Adams, who has made sure all his life that he hasn't been connected to anything. So why would he hire someone so stupid, really, as Stephen Marshall to carry out anything other than being a doorman? If he did. I think the allegations of Stephen Marshall being his nephew, I don't know, I can't find anything to say that he's refuted that or whatever. They certainly haven't said anything about the allegations of that Stephen Marshall has made about them, saying that he'd chopped up 4 bodies and dumped them for this syndicate. He hasn't said anything, no one has. But my other issue, you see, is if Stephen Marshall's telling the truth, right? And you are meant to be related to this family, and you've done that, and you've stood up in court, and you said, for them, I have killed and dismembered 4 other bodies, but I'm not saying anymore. I mean, what criminal gang is going to let you live after saying that, really? If it's true, right? If it's true. Because some point down the line, you're going to talk, or they may think you're going to talk. And if you're one of my members, we've been discussing gangland killings and stuff over the last couple of weeks. You would understand that this sort of criminal lifestyle, you never speak. They can't take the chance. Because none of these brothers, and especially, when you're talking about Terry Adams, there's no way that Terry Adams would allow anybody to have some hold over him like that and still be alive if the allegations against Terry Adams are true, that he is this massive boss of this massive criminal syndicate worth over 200 million. Any man or any business, really, any director of a company that can turn over 200 million is a very sensible man. Again, coming back to my point, why would anyone hire someone like Stephen Marshall to do this sort of a crime? They just wouldn't, would they, really? I think the only criminal thing against Terry Adams himself, is money laundering. That was it, and I think he's had to pay back legal fees of 4.7 million. He's had to pay costs of 800,000, this sort of thing. I think proceeds of crime have come into it, but you know, about what, 800,000, I think, something like that. A few of the brothers. Now the brothers are Terry, I've got them wrote down here, there's so many of them. So we've got Terry, and he's the main one, then we've got Patrick, and then we've got Tommy, and there was another one. But none of these people, I don't think, would associate themselves with someone like Stephen Marshall, because none of these want to go to prison for the rest of their life. Do you see what I mean? So the reason why I think that Stephen Marshall is one still alive in prison is because none of what he says about his links to the criminal underworld is true. It just really isn't. It's impossible for it to be true, because if it was true, the risk of him saying something about the bodies, about putting these people in the frame for these sort of murders, it just couldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. And so that's why I don't believe him. I just don't. So if any of you out there know anything about Stephen Marshall's claim of being related, the nephew of Terry Adams, or Terry Adams out there yourself, if you'd like to refute it, that's, you know, that'd be great. I'll get Lacey to have a look at the birth records and see what we can find out that way. But whether he is a relative of them or not, to bring them up in court unnecessarily, to mention them by name, he done it, and that's what he stated to a witness. I done this crimes for 4 murders and dismemberment of bodies for the Adams family. That's what he stated. As I've stated before about Stephen Marshall, he murdered Jeffrey Howe, really through greed. He wanted Jeffrey's flat, he wanted the money, he sold the cars, you know, he had the young girlfriend, you know, she was naive, she was stupid as well, but she was still part of it. This is not the character of somebody, really, that belongs to this sort of syndicate, right? It doesn't. Then the thing is you've got with Marshall is that he knew, as the evidence against him was so, you know, overwhelming, really, evidence against him, because he's a stupid criminal. He's a stupid murderer, really, because he murdered someone, stabbed this man in the back in his own home, dismembered that body in the bathroom, knowing, I mean, thought he'd give it a good old clean, but you cannot clean up that much DNA evidence. You cannot. There's always going to be stuff left around, and blood stains anywhere under the tiles. Blood will just go anywhere. When you're chopping up a body in a bathroom, right, in a small everyday bathroom, you know, not nothing massive, it was small, and you know, Jeffrey Howe was quite a large man. You're going to have skins, you're going to have stuff laying around where you think you've got it, but you just can't see it until everything's ripped to pieces, and then the police come in and they put on the Illumino, and then they find what they're looking for. This is what happened. But then to leave the trail, right, of body parts, what you've cut up yourself in holdalls that you've owned, with probably your DNA on them as well, you know, this is not a sensible killer. This isn't someone, I think one night, probably what happened here was Stephen Marshall and Sarah Bush sat there and think, we need some money, he's got loads, we'll kill him. And I think that's really what happened. I think it was just, we're going to kill him. I don't think there was much plan to it. We're going to chop the body up, we'll dump it. Because where are you going to put a body these days? Really? You know, really, where are you going to put a body? And I think this was the whole thing with this case, from start to finish. He's not a sensible murderer. He didn't try and hide a body. He actually scattered the body like he was playing some game with the police. And this is why this jigsaw murder is called that, because it was like a jigsaw to try and put together. He was playing games, but he knew no matter how much he denied, how much he'd said in no comment interview, that evidence was coming in. The data evidence, you know, you've used the man's card, you've wrote checks to yourself from the man, you've sold his car, you've filled up petrol in your car but with his number plates, knowing there's CCTV up there. This is not an intelligent man here. This is not someone that would work for a syndicate worth over £200 million. No way on this earth. There's no way. I think he's a total liar. I think he'd done it because in prison there's a hierarchy, and we spoke about this before. And if you are in a large gang or a member of a criminal gang, you are higher up on that scale, aren't you? Stephen Marshall said all this bullshit, all this lies, which he manifested in his mind as he knew the police and the courts and the prosecution had got enough evidence to put this man away for the rest of his life for this terrible murder, really, of Jeffrey. It was just terrible. And this was his elaborate plan to make his life in prison better. That's what I believe. But if you know anything different, or anyone out there knows anything different, then let me know, because I'll be very interested in what you've got to say. If you had any dealings with Stephen Marshall at that time, it would be really interesting. After the trial, it was revealed that Marshall had previous convictions. They always usually do. His was criminal damage, assault and battery, possession of a firearm, cocaine possession. He also attacked his first wife in 2003. And so the attack on his wife as well, I think on his first wife, and that was, he was sort of arrested for that. And he was also arrested on suspicion of murdering somebody else in 1996 when his burnt body was found. He was never charged and instead appearing as a witness. Now, Sarah Bush had 2 convictions, or prior cautions, not convictions, of cannabis and assault. So in total, really, Stephen Marshall got 36 years before he's eligible for parole. That means he'll be 74 before he comes out, or is eligible to even come out, if he survives that long on his stories. I think he appealed the 36-year sentence, saying it was too long, and that was in October 2010. That was refused by the 2 Court of Appeal judges in November 2010. So he will do 36 years in prison as a minimum, 36 years. And to tell the truth, I don't think it's enough. I just don't. I mean, you know, not only have you admitted to one murder, and you know, Jeffrey Howe was an innocent man that tried to help you, and you killed him and chopped up his body and just dumped him like he's bloody rubbish. And then he appeals his sentence of 36 years because he thinks it's too long. I mean, the mentality of some of these people. Listen, anyway, this has been the Jigsaw Murder. Quite a shocking case, really, when you think about it. From all areas. But also, it's one of the most cases that I feel legally is a strange case, because the way it was pleaded not guilty, I've just never heard of it. And then 3 weeks into the trial you plead guilty, and then you come out with all this stuff which you didn't need to say. There was no need for him to say any other, you know, admit to anything else, and he admits to 4 others of doing this for this crime family to make himself, though, feel and look better, because he knows he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. He knows it. He knows it. I don't know. I mean, do you think, right, do you think Stephen Marshall, well, we know he's a killer. Do you believe his story? Do you believe that he worked for, you know, serious criminal families, disposed of bodies for them? Because let me be honest though, when I say this, to dismember a body is not easy. And the dismemberment of this body was really good, right? It would have appeared rather, you know, it's like a butcher working with it or something. He would have had to have some knowledge. But again, I come back to, he may have seen it before. He may have learnt that. There was no rush to get rid of this body, all right? He wasn't rushed. I mean, Christ, you can look at it on Google, can't you, really? You can. But, you know, so it's not impossible that he didn't know what he was doing. Of course, anyone can learn to cut up a body easily. It's not that easy, but you can learn. Or had he really done it before? You know, had he really done it? But if he'd really done it, the mentality of someone like him to say that he's done it, well, there's no reason for him to say that he's done it. It makes me feel that he hasn't. Really. Because he had no money, he had no ties to anyone else, he was living in someone else's property, he was working a normal job. This isn't what someone that works for crime families, as someone that would chop up bodies, dismember bodies for you and get away with, would do. It's just, for me, if you've watched the movie Iceman, I think he did, and I think he's took it from that. But let me know what you think. It'd be really interesting to know what you think about this case. I just find legally, you know, it's a fascinating case, really. But our thoughts again have to go, don't they, to Jeffrey Howe, this 49-year-old man that lost his life either on the 8th or 9th, you know, of March in 2009. His life was ended, however way you want to look at it, by Stephen Marshall, an innocent man, kind man, friendly man, a man that would give you a room, a roof over your head because you didn't have anything. That's the sort of man that Jeffrey Howe was, and how very, very sad. Very, very sad for him, and very, very sad for anyone that knows him and his family. Really, really sad. So thank you for watching, and until the next time, bye bye.